Worldwide, this is FSN.
Cheers, Ollie. Thank you very much. Hey, welcome to Tuesday's Richie Allen Show. How are you? Hope you've had a good day. Turned out lovely here in the great city after a miserable old start. It's been a lovely autumnal afternoon. It is September the 11th, red letter day in history, of course, 17 years on. My name is Richie Allen. Tweet me right now. It's at Richie Allen Show if there's something you'd like to tell me.
Richie Allen.
It's the Richie Allen Show, broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Now I welcome back Mark Collett to the programme. This hour, Mark is a political activist and the author of The Fall of Western Man, which is free if you want to get it for free. If you go to thefallofwesternman.com. Mark and I will be talking about the alleged rise of the right and the alleged rise in interest amongst the public. Their interest is rising. Their interest, I should say, is peaking. And they are looking towards right-wing institutions and parties. Are they really? Mark Collett joins me this hour. And then we're off to Washington State in the second hour. Dr. Martin Pall PHD, live from Washington State University. He is, well, he's a lone voice, or is he, in academia, talking about the effects of non-ionizing radiation, EMFs, pulses, the rollout of 5G, and the human health implications of that. This is very serious, of course. So Martin Pall joins me in the second hour. And if there's something you think you'd like me to put to Martin Pall, just tweet it, as I said, to at Richie Allen Show. Tuesday's show then. Right, let's just get straight into it, because there's quite a bit to talk about. So there is in the monologue. Right. Found this very interesting today. That, and this isn't new in terms of, we've known this was coming. But today, a cross-party group of members of Parliament, a cross-party group of MPs, led by Lucy Powell MP, a Manchester MP. She's leading, and her group is leading, the latest in a long line of attempts to clamp down on internet freedom. Why? What do they want, this cross-party group of MPs? Well, they want to outlaw secret forums on social media. And they want to make companies like Facebook and Twitter legally liable for content published on their services. Google as well. So Lucy Powell says she wants to eradicate online hate and radicalisation. This is no joke, my friend. We've talked about this before. It's very serious. And as I said, she is supported right across the House of Parliament. This is going to win the day. Here she is, Lucy Powell, on Sky News a little while ago. Well, in fact, around about lunchtime.
Well, I think all of us in public life have been subject to some of the kind of phenomena that happen on social media. So it's a little bit personal, but it's mainly just what I've seen develop over the last couple of years. I think the power and the penetration of some of these online forums, these closed groups on platforms like Facebook, are so powerful, much more powerful actually than some of our national newspapers in terms of their reach and penetration. Yet they have no accountability and no responsibility for what gets posted in them. And quite a few of them are actually deliberately set up by people who have very malign agendas, who are knowingly misleading people who are members of these groups. So I think, the last piece of legislation that covered this sort of area was in 2003, which was before Facebook even existed. So I think the law is lagging far, far behind. Yeah,
and of course there was no question from Sarah Jane Mee, the presenter. No question with respect to, or was it, it was actually Jane Secker, excuse me. It was Jane Secker, let's get it right, Richie. At no time did Jane Secker say, tell us about these malign groups. How do you know about them? And what is being discussed within them, if they are for members only and if they are password protected? What could possibly be going on? And what about the thousands, maybe millions of groups that exist where people are talking about very benign things? Maybe parenting, maybe health, maybe pottery, maybe music, maybe sport. What about those as well? Very sinister, this. And when I said a few minutes ago, this is going to win the day, it is. They will pass legislation to cover this and to give the likes of Lucy Powell what it is they want. Now, Robert Sharp is a member of a group called PEN, as in Biro, PEN. It stands for Poets, Essayists and Novelists. What do they campaign for? Well, they campaign strongly for freedom of thought, freedom of expression and the right to privacy. So Robert Sharp also spoke with Sky News.
We do a lot of campaigning internationally, and what we've seen is that a lot of pro-democracy movements, a lot of movements that we would like to encourage that actually bring peace and understanding between people often happen in exactly these kind of groups. These groups are deemed radical and extremist by the authoritarian regimes that try to suppress them. So the first thing that makes me a little bit wary about Lucy Powell's proposals is that the net's going to be drawn too wide, and also that we set a pretty bad example to regimes around the world to introduce similar laws that will clamp down on, as I say, pro-democracy activists or humanists working in other parts of the world.
Yeah, good stuff. And that's exactly what you have to be wary of. But you also have to be honest and say, this is not really about extremists and jihadists and people who might plot to do things that are against the law. They want to compel Facebook to open up all of these groups, and they want to make Facebook, and of course, this presenter and many of the guests on this programme wouldn't have any sympathy for Facebook. I have a very strong opinion about why Facebook was set up, and I've expressed that opinion many times on the programme. I don't believe the Jesse Eisenberg film Social Network story, this idea that this guy was a bit of an opportunist and he saw an opening and he put this monstrous website, which obviously wasn't monstrous in the beginning, but this, website for people to share with friends and family and to meet old friends and all of that. I don't believe that is true. I believe that Facebook is the creation of the intelligence agencies. And I believe that Mark Zuckerberg, either wittingly or unwittingly, is basically a front man for what it is. It was designed to basically, I used the analogy a couple of years ago, to kettle the world's internet users, which is most of the world, into one place. So it is more easy, it is more simple to control, most importantly, what they see, what they read, and what they hear, what they are exposed to. Because Facebook could get everybody involved, and all the alternative content producers in the world, all the independent journalists in the world were like, oh, this is brilliant. We can have our own. It's a level playing field on Facebook, or so they thought, but of course it isn't. And Facebook, what it does is, using its very sophisticated modus operandi, which is algorithmic and all of that, they just make sure that very few people actually get exposed to the genuine alternative media. And that's what it does, right? That's what it does. So they want to compel Facebook to open all this stuff up and make them legally liable for the content of their network, I suppose, and the content of the groups, these secret groups on the platform. But of course, they're not really, as I said, interested in finding jihadists who might be plotting to do something or might be discussing it. What they really want is they want to just basically eliminate your and my right to privacy once and for all, to create a world where no conversation that you have with anybody can be private. And that's what it is. And it is going to come in. It is going to be rolled out. There's not going to be much opposition to it. We just have to, we'll have to roll with it. It's one of the reasons why I came off Facebook personally. I know there is a page for the Richie Allen Show, and it's run by a friend of mine. I don't have anything to do with it. But I came off it personally, and I will be coming off Twitter in due course. For this reason, effectively. Moving on, and this is going to run, and we will be talking about it. This infringement, this encroachment on our rights to assemble, whether that's online or offline, our rights to think and to talk and to opine about the events that we opine about, and to do that without Big Brother looking over your shoulder and telling you that what you're doing is hate speech. What you are doing is fake news. You can't do it anymore. That is what they are ushering in. And they're going to usher it in. There's no stopping this, sadly. Here's an interesting one for you. 13 and a half minutes past the hour, Tuesday's programme. According to every television and radio show today, because everybody covered this, poor mental health affects half of all employees. Wow. Really? Poor mental health affects half of all employees. This is a survey that was carried out by the mental health charity Mind. So Mind surveyed 44,000 people. That's an interesting number, by the way, isn't it? 44 and 44,000. Yeah. My numerologist listeners will know all about it. Very interesting. So they surveyed 44,000 people, and they said half of all employees in the UK suffer poor mental health, and only half of those who experienced stress, anxiety or low mood. Now I want you to keep low mood in your mind for a minute. Only half of them had talked to their employer about it. That's something that must change, says Mind. Mind wants, not just Mind, all the mental health charities, they want us talking to our employers all the time about what's going on in our minds. When we come to work and we're a little bit pissed off, a little bit down in the dumps, could just be a bit of a mood swing, mood change, be a bit fed up of life. You've got to talk to your employer about that, because according to Mind, just feeling a little bit under the weather or just not quite able to face the day, that is a mental health issue. And you should be talking about that with your employer. And employers, companies have got to make resources available to improve the well-being of employees. I know what you're thinking. Richie's been a bit... Richie might be being a bit of an arsehole about this. Isn't it a good thing, surely, that if people are feeling a bit fed up and a bit down in the dumps and are just having one of those days, that they should go and let their employer know about it? What's wrong with that, Richie? What's wrong with training employers to be aware that people sometimes are a bit down in the dumps and sometimes they're just not up to carrying out their tasks on any given day? Well, this is all over the media today, and I mean all over it. I said this already. Like I said last week, if you remember the monologue where I played the BBC and Sky stories on one given day, they were the same stories, in the same order, often with the same scripts. Well, today it was blanket coverage. Employers need to be more sensitive to the mental health problems of their employees. Look, I'm a trade unionist to the bone. You've heard me talk about rights for employees 1,000 times, but this is sinister. Let's have some balance here. If somebody is sick, they are entitled to sick leave. They are protected by the law as it stands. Employers can't just say, oh, you're fired, when somebody has been sick and they have produced a certificate from a doctor. Now, I know I'm not naive. Massive corporations like Amazon and others, they play hard and fast with the law, and they do treat employees like shite over sick leave. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but this is ridiculous. And sick leave does cover mental health issues. This is ridiculous, though. Half the country's workforce have been affected by poor mental health. Well, obviously, if you're including things like, well, I just feel a bit blue today. I want you to listen to something. This guy, James Routledge, was on Sky News today. He's a young guy, and he runs an organisation called Sanctus. Sanctus, sounds lovely. They want to raise awareness and they want to get employers to train to deal with mental health issues. Wait till you hear what this guy said this morning on Sky News.
As an employer, if you create an environment where mental health is supported and accepted, you're going to attract the best talent, because now people don't want to go to work and pretend to be something they're not. They don't want to puff their chest out and leave their personal life at the door. You know, people, especially the younger generation, they want to go to work and they want it to be aligned with their values. They want to feel purposeful in their work and they want to be able to kind of show up and be themselves. So if as an employer you can make a commitment to mental health, you're going to attract and retain the best talent and you're going to get the most out of people.
You heard that right. I couldn't believe my ears. And the presenter went along with it. Imagine the nightmare of employing the young people of the future. Wow. Did you hear what he just said there? Create an environment where mental health is supported. Where mental health is supported. Not where people who are dealing with mental health issues are supported. No. Because you see, that's a good thing. You couldn't argue with that. Your employer, your bosses, your head of administration at school, your head teacher, your teacher, whatever. People should be supported if they have a genuine mental health problem. But they're not saying that. They're saying create an environment where mental health is supported, where young people can go to work and not leave their personal life at the door. Where young people can work and have a job that's in line with their values, he said. And where mental health problems are including things like stress, anxiety or low mood. And they were phoning the BBC this morning saying that there are days when you're just not up for it, when you're not in the mood for it, and right across the media today, experts, in inverted commas, were saying, well, that is a mental health issue. And employers have to be more aware of that and more sensitive to it. Imagine dealing with the narcissistic identitarians of the future who can be triggered because somebody disagreed with them on Twitter, who can be reduced to a quivering mass of jelly because they hear something that they believe to be hate speech or that they believe to be racist. They can then walk into work with a puss on them and their employer has to deal with their reluctance to do their job that they are contractually obliged to do because they're just a bit fed up. Wow. I'm going to get into that in more depth in a future programme. I've no doubt about it. It's 21 minutes past the hour. Loads to talk about, but not so much time to get into it. I wanted to talk about Twitter and Kirsty Allsop, who's a UK television presenter who's left Twitter because she was trolled by people because she broke a couple of iPads because her children were using them when they shouldn't have been using them. There's a number of facets to that particular story. And a cartoonist in Australia has been trolled around the world. Not that he cares, which is good. A guy called Mark Knight painted a newspaper cartoon. He drew Serena Williams jumping up and down over a broken racket next to a baby's dummy. Serena went absolutely crazy. She went batshit crazy in a tennis match on Saturday and was very rude to an umpire who took a game off her. She said it was sexist. People are saying it's racist. This guy depicted the scene in a pretty funny cartoon anyway, and he's been called racist as well, but his newspaper are standing by him and saying no, it isn't. It is a fair depiction of very bad behaviour, mocking poor behaviour by a tennis legend. But again, it speaks to some of what I talk about with my guests on this programme regularly. I might tweet the cartoon out if I can grab it there. Right, 22 minutes past the hour. Let's move on. We'll have a very quick break. When I come back, Mark Collett joins the programme. Mark's been on before, always interesting. Don't miss it, and tweet at Richie Allen Show.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. they become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever. Forever.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Introducing the H2O app, a powerful water structuring application that programs vibrational energies into water through the use of different sound frequencies. Once programmed, the use of water for drinking, cooking, bathing. Give it to your friends and colleagues or spread it around the garden. The list goes on. It's not just water that the app can be used for either. It's great for programming crystals too. The H2O app is free to download and is available on both Android and Apple platforms. For further information, go to h2oapp.online.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
Yeah, welcome back. Loads of tweets on that. Natalie, who has run a pub recently and knows all about the service industry, says surely all employees in the wide service industry will need safe spaces. Well, that's where you're going, really. Some of you are taking You're taking something different from that story. Patrick tweets, sounds like a cabal of controllers want us to walk around the workplace with a perpetual smile on our faces. The next thing we'll find is that it will be a disciplinary offence not to be bright and breezy for fear of infecting fellow workers with one's bad mood. Well, maybe I'm missing something, Patrick. That's an interesting take on that story. Tweet at Richie Allen Show, 25 minutes past the hour. We're live if you're listening live, or not if you're listening to the podcast, or you're listening to it on YouTube. My first guest is no stranger to the programme. Just before we welcome him back to the show, spoke quite a bit yesterday about the success of the Sweden Democrats Party in the general election in Sweden, increasing their vote by 12%. And when you juxtapose that with the success of right-wing anti-immigration parties in Austria, in Hungary, and elsewhere around Europe, you might be forgiven for asking, is the right on the rise in Europe? Is it really? Well, let's welcome our first guest to the programme. As I said, he's no stranger to the show. He is a political analyst, a political activist, and an author. I mentioned his book at the top of the show, and I will tweet out a link to it if you haven't read it before. It's well worth a read. It's The Fall of Western Man, and it can be found at thefallofwesternman.com. Mark Collett, welcome back to our show. How are you?
I'm great, thanks, and thank you for having me on. It's great to be back, and also it's great to hear you're back, because last time I was scheduled to be on the show, it was literally the day you were taken into hospital.
Yes,
so
that's right. I went down. That's right, Mark. Thanks very much for saying that. Yeah, I went down. I went down. I was scuppered for a while, but no, thanks for the kind words there, and good to have you back. It's great to get the points of view expressed on the show that maybe I don't express or don't agree with. Not that it matters whether I agree with them or not. So is the right on the rise? And I want to ask you to dig down into, I understand that people are fed up with the status quo. They're fed up with services under enormous pressure in their countries. They're fed up of open door immigration policies. I'm well aware of it. I don't dispute that at all. And I know they're turning to alternative politicians and they're turning to alternative news programs. But let's talk about the political parties they are turning to. Are they genuine, these parties? Are they genuine in what they say and in the, I suppose, the doctrine that they preach? What do you think?
I think they are genuine, and I think you can tell they're genuine, and I think you can tell they're genuinely anti-establishment by the fact that these parties are condemned not only by all the other parties together, but also by the press, the mainstream media, and a whole selection of fashionable celebrities who are all in on the game, on the establishment's game. And I think when you can see that there are different parties, like, say, left-leaning parties or liberal parties, that are all tolerated, that are all accepted up on a stage with these main parties, but all of these main parties will round together with these other smaller parties to condemn these nationalist groups. You can see that the nationalist groups are really the only alternative to the establishment. They're the only parties, they're the only groups, they're the only people who the establishment really aim their fire at and try to shut down.
When you dig down, the reason I ask this question is because when you, and again I want to differentiate between the genuine support from people, whether those people are right or not right to support left-wing, right-wing, centrist parties is their own business. The support for these parties is genuine. What I'm getting at, and I've been getting at this for years and years and years, is that these parties are in effect just the establishment wearing a different mask. And it's often borne out that when these parties get a whiff of power, I could talk about Marine Le Pen and her flip-flopping, which is a fair way of putting it, on the European Union, and talking about before the last election in France that, well, yeah, you know, I could see how France would stay in a reformed European Union. What I mean, Mark, is, and if you want to go after me and say, Richie, give me examples, I won't immediately, but I will later on. Many of the people associated with these parties are establishment figures. They come from the world of finance. They come from the world of big business. And I don't believe they're a genuine alternative to what we've had traditionally. That's what I'm trying to dig down at. Is it just the establishment wearing a different mask?
Well, I can't speak for everyone. The first thing I'll say about Marine Le Pen is I'm not sure what context she said that about the European Union. Now, and what I mean by that, I'm not trying to cover for her or flip-flop myself, but when people were originally sold the idea of the common market, the idea of this was just a trading bloc. Now, I'm sure that even people who were very staunchly Brexit would still be in favour of some form of free trade between different states. For example, my parents voted to enter the common market. They thought the idea of European nations being allowed to trade freely and easily with each other was a wonderful idea. However, they both voted to leave the EU because when they voted to enter the common market, they voted exactly for that, to enter a common market. They did not vote to enter a huge political union which would slowly erode the rights of each individual member state. So if Marine Le Pen was saying that, yes, we would have what was originally tabled, the idea of a common market, and she would be in favour of France being involved in a common market, I think most people in France would probably be in favour of that. What most people in France most likely aren't in favour of is the EU in its current form. So I can't really comment on what she's saying, but that could be a reasonable explanation, because that's what I hear a lot of people say. Now, there will be people who believe in absolute Brexit, but I think those are few and far between. Most people would want sensible trading regulations, but what they don't want is the oppressive EU state. Now, as for my personal perspective on financiers and bankers being part of sort of quote unquote far right parties or right wing populist parties or nationalist parties, whatever you want to call them, I've never experienced that. Now, I was involved with the British National Party for 10 long years. And in my time in the British National Party, I never met anyone who was a high-ranking banker or financier. In fact, I can't really remember anyone in the party who was involved in any kind of banking or finance at all. Most people involved were usually self-made businessmen, people who worked as tradesmen, people who worked an honest day's work. They certainly weren't people who were involved in the kind of money lending or banking that we're discussing now.
No, but you would accept that Donald Trump, for example, still heralded by those on the alt-right or on the right of politics, still see Donald Trump as an anti-establishment figure and believe that his ideas are, fresh and new and original, and they are basically that the direction he would take them or will take them is in the opposite direction to that of those that went before him. But that isn't true, and a lot of researchers who wouldn't fit into any category in terms of their own politics being described as right or left, have done stellar work, including Neil Sanders, the author, on the money behind not only Trump but the alt-right and alt-right movements around the world. Again, not to labour this because we can move on from it. While I concede that the desire for answers to the effects of mass migration, to the effects of globalism, are of course genuine because everybody feels and experiences them, what's being offered as an alternative is not genuine. And it's fairly easy to debunk the idea that these are genuine grassroots movements. I mean, I could spend hours now talking about Steve Bannon and the people he, associates with and his cohorts and the billions and billions of pounds pumped into this alt-right movement. It's just the establishment by another name. And on the Marine Le Pen thing, what Le Pen said last summer and last autumn was she conceded that she wouldn't leave the European Union, would try to renegotiate France's sovereignty from within it and accept that she'd have to stay in the euro. Now, Mark, that's an absolutely outrageous betrayal of the people that voted for her, worked with her, walked with her for years and years and years. And I would say what Alexis Tsipras and Yanis Varoufakis gave to the Greeks, and you can jump down my throat now and say, but that's different, Richie, they're on the left. They're not, it doesn't matter. What the En Marche movement gave to the French was again just a lie. It was just the establishment, the status quo wearing another mask. I'm passionate about that. I think the evidence is right there. I don't believe these parties are genuine. I believe that they are there. They are given. They are put out there by an establishment that knows that people have never been as pissed off and is fed up with their lot in life. An establishment that's worried about that. So what better to do than to present you with the opposition to it? And I think that's what we're seeing. I'll give you the last word on that. Go ahead. Before we move on.
As I say, I've never encountered anything like that. Most people I know, most people I work with who would be classified as alt-right, they're out there working day jobs, and when they're not working day jobs, they're on YouTube, they're on social networks, they're producing content, they're working hard, they're giving huge amounts of their own time. And as for big finances or funding flowing into this movement, I've never seen a penny of that. Now, I do agree with you.
Of course, I'm not talking about you, Mark. I mean, look, you're a genuine guy.
There are some people who get huge amounts of funding. I mean, I am very suspicious of people like Ezra Levant, people running outlets like Rebel Media who are pumping money into it, but then they usually show their hand by very, very quickly linking whatever they do with the state of Israel, which was the first thing he did. And I've never had anything to do with Rebel Media or really anyone who's worked for it. In fact, they despise me. So, but on the people I work with, I've never seen that money, and I see a lot of people sort of struggling to make ends meet like normal people do, but then in their spare time, they're not down the pub, they're not watching X Factor, they're trying to do something to lift the veil off the eyes of others.
No doubt about it. But many of those people will look to champions like you mentioned Rebel Media and the various personalities, and you could talk about people like Tommy Robinson and Milo Yiannopoulos, and there are so many of them. Lauren Southern, for example. And one of the great lies, which I think exposes that this whole movement, and again, I am not critical of those who want to believe in it, because I understand why they want to believe in it, but that whole movement, one of the great lies that it's predicated on is this idea that conservative voices are being marginalised, Now, I know you're going to jump all over me, and I'm going to give you the space to do that. I'm going to shut up in a minute. They're not being marginalised. These people are being elevated into the public eye, whether it's through Google and YouTube, which these people are. All right, they might bitch and say, oh, I was kicked off Twitter. It doesn't matter. They are promoted by Facebook and by YouTube when other voices and other opinions, particularly those who say that the far left and the far right is a nonsense. It's two faces of the same coin. We got to get rid of the whole system completely. Those voices are marginalised, but these people are promoted. It's one of the great lies of the modern era. We're being targeted. We're being marginalised. They're trying to shut us up. Well, in fact, they're not. All the evidence is to the contrary. What do you think?
Well, I think all the evidence suggests that anyone on the right is being marginalised. I mean, when you look at some of the biggest pages that have been taken down from Facebook, they're pages like the Britain First page, they're pages like Tommy Robinson's page, they are pages like pages of Faith Goldie, pages, Candice Owens, she's a black conservative and she's been censored on Twitter. The number of right-wing Twitter accounts that have been shut down, taken off, people like Jared Taylor, people like Milo Yiannopoulos, all these people have been shut down, and we see this wealth of people who have blue check marks by their name, who are coming out with quite vicious anti-white statements saying that they celebrate white genocide, that white people need to die out, that mass immigration should be accelerated so white people are replaced. You even have people saying that they enjoy the suffering of white people, that they get off on the suffering of white people. These people have blue check marks by their name, and none of them are being censored. Now, if you, and this was actually done by Candice Owens, she actually took some of these tweets and replaced the word white with words like black, words like Jewish, and her account was suspended immediately. So it does go to show that Twitter has algorithms that allow for people to be instantly suspended for saying things that are critical of, say, Jews, those of African descent. But if you say something critical or even downright racist about people of European descent, your account, nothing will happen to it. There are no infractions. And in fact, I know that Twitter have even been banning accounts that have been highlighting these kind of tweets and highlighting these double standards. And I know from my own personal YouTube account and from friends of mine, these accounts are going down really, really regularly. YouTube have demonetized people. They have put people's videos into limited state. And there is an aggressive campaign of flagging and harassment of people who speak about issues such as race, immigration, ethnicity, and the impact of, say, the mass immigration of large numbers of Muslims into the West. And I know your account has also been attacked. You have also had your voice curtailed, but I can give you a list as long as my arm of people who have been censored. But I think we can both agree on one thing. The left aren't being censored at all.
Well, of course, it depends on what constitutes the left. It depends on how you define the left, whether you're talking about the revolutionary left, as my guest spoke about yesterday evening, or the progressive Marxist multicultural left, which is not the left as I would have understood it growing up. Look, there's no doubt that the social media giants are curtailing, are shadow banning, and ultimately deleting certain accounts. And you mentioned earlier on groups like Britain's First and others. But there's a glaring difference between Britain First and its members, or maybe the BNP and its members, and the likes of these alt-right celebrities that we mentioned earlier on. Because if you only take one of them, the Tommy Robinson story, particularly in 2018, is a very interesting one. And you mentioned that my YouTube channel was deleted. Now, I was not going to mention that because I don't care anymore. It was deleted. I had 80-odd thousand subscribers and 20-odd million views in 3 years, and it was growing exponentially. But I don't care about that. But at the time that happened, my channel was younger than Tommy Robinson's, and it had the same amount of subscribers, and I had marginally more views than him. I was watching this very closely. And you said, Robinson was kicked off Twitter. but he gets millions and millions of YouTube views. He is definitely being promoted by YouTube. And not only that, but whether it's RT or whether it's the BBC or whether it's Channel 4 News, they can't get enough of him. That's promoting him. And it's promoting him big time. I suppose you could make the argument that while they're doing that, while they're marginalising other conservative thinkers, what they're ultimately doing is playing people off against one another, left and right, far left versus far right, while things go on as normal. That's fair enough, right?
Well, I wouldn't categorise myself as a conservative or a conservative thinker, and I don't think Tommy Robinson would categorise himself as that. Now, he has been censored on Facebook and Twitter, but his YouTube account is still in full effect. But he is a very popular guy. I mean, you saw the demonstrations, the anger when he got sent to prison. Now, obviously, I think you might have watched my YouTube video about it because we discussed it.
Yeah.
When he went, I mean, I personally didn't agree with I don't agree with anyone who does anything that can essentially prejudice a case and cause a case like that to collapse. And obviously, we don't know the outcome of this yet. We don't know who was in the right or who was in the wrong, because I believe he is still going to be retried over that, because at the moment he has been released on what is essentially a technicality, that the process of his conviction was rushed and that he wasn't given enough time to prepare a defence. Now, I was led to believe that he pled guilty and that a guilty plea would essentially mean that he served his sentence, that there would be no appeal. But that wasn't the case. I'll be very interested to see what happens when all the facts come to light. But Tommy Robinson, I think, it is a real exception, but that's more because he's a household name. I mean, genuinely, people do know him. People talk about him all the time. He is constantly doing things that get himself in the public eye. But I think part of that is because he's a smooth operator. And that doesn't mean I'm pouring praise on him. What it means is he knows exactly what to do to get himself in the newspapers. He knows that when he turns up somewhere, what he is doing is bringing a media circus, and he is very good at fueling that kind of publicity.
Well, that's proving my point, because he gets that publicity. And I've been around this game 20 odd years. One way to guarantee throwing more light on somebody or on some subject is by the likes of Facebook or Twitter banning it. It doesn't have the effect that Robinson, the martyr, would claim it has. Oh, I'm being silenced, they're stopping people, listen to me. No, it's nonsense. It's the opposite that's actually true. And they know this, the people who do that. So what I'm saying is, that's being promoted heavily. The genuine concerns of people about immigration and what immigration has meant for working class communities in European countries, what it has done to the economies of Southern Europe. Those people might be being marginalised and being banned, but this other side of it, Robinson and Southern, a complete airhead, in my opinion, and many others, actually not being attacked. It might look like it. Oh, we were kicked off Twitter. But it's a guarantee that when you do that, you draw more attention to these people. You drive people to their websites, and you drive people to their YouTube channels, which have not been deleted, and get millions and millions of views. It's just classic divide and conquer. And while it goes on, the real issues, the meat and drink of what's happening and why it's happening, are ignored, and it gets reduced to the likes of people tweeting out things about some crime that was committed in Hackney or in Newcastle and saying, oh, there you go, the immigrants again. It gets reduced to that, and any intellectual aspect of it just goes out the window, and you get heroes put on pedestals on the far left and on the far right. These people are not genuine. They're being promoted, and it's easy then. It's easy for the establishment to direct people whose angst is genuine, whose misery is genuine about the lives they are leading, to direct them into that area. That's all. It's a point I've been making for years and years and years. I don't believe it's genuine. The establishment, Mark, I believe, will always give you, and there are plenty of people who can see through it, will always hand you the most vociferous opposition to it. And I'm stunned that more people can't see that. I'm stunned that they fall for cretins like Tommy Robinson. And it's not personal. I interviewed a guy a couple of times years ago, but I never met him. But he's a cretin. He's got nothing to say of any interest. He's got nothing new to lend to this debate about multiculturalism or progressive politics or identity politics. Nothing new, other than stir people up to to shout and chant that it's the immigrants, when it's not the immigrants, and you and I know it isn't. It's far, far deeper than that. Over to you.
Well, I think you do make some good points, and I think in the short term, these bans do cause a huge boost in people's popularity. And we've seen that with Alex Jones. When Alex Jones was banned off YouTube and Facebook, and now he's also banned off Twitter as well, that's given him an absolutely huge boost. And he said his metrics on his website and Google searches for him, they went through the roof. And I've seen that for other people. But the problem is that temporary boost is then not replicated in the forthcoming months. And Jared Taylor, I was speaking to him, he's from American Renaissance. When he was banned on Twitter, he had a huge boost in his website traffic because people talked about it. It was a big outrage at the time. And then he said after that, it soon dies off and you find you're actually getting less traffic because you're not on these social networks. So the long-term effect is not a positive. You get a short boost because you're talk of the town, but after that, you are officially put into the dustbin of history. And most people don't get to see your message thereafter because you've been taken out of the public space. And my large concern here is that social media like YouTube, like Facebook, like Twitter, these companies have essentially got monopolies. Facebook has got the monopoly on the social network. YouTube has got the monopoly on video sharing. Twitter has got the monopoly on microblogging. And these are the new town squares. These are the new public spaces. And when people are banned from these and selectively banned from these, it gives these corporations an absolutely huge amount of power to literally control the public discourse. If Google don't like you, they can make you disappear.
Can't you see that was always the plan, Mark? I mean, it was obvious. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to realise. I call it kettling. It's online kettling. Of course, Facebook is the only game in town. It's the only game in town. I mean, Christ, there's 1.8, 1.9 billion, maybe more than 2 billion people using it now. It can't be just ignored, or you can't dismiss. I don't mean you now, but people can't dismiss the idea that this was always the way it was going to be. Get people into one area, get them into one place. Obviously, in the in public, the police can do that. They can surround people with horses and say, right, well, you're not going to speak to anybody today. You're not going to do anything, and that's the way they do it. But they can do that in cyberspace as well. And that's what these networks were designed to do, so that they could control what you see and when. And we should have been wise to that.
You've got an unholy alliance here between government parties, the media, the social networks, and they are completely controlling the narrative. They are filtering what people can see. They are labeling things fake news that they don't like to hear about. I mean, just today, YouTube have banned a load of accounts that are supportive of the Syrian government. So are we leading up to another false flag chemical attack in Syria?
No doubt.
Is this the establishment and the, Zionists' last gasp at an attempt to sell a war in Syria to the Western populace? Is that what's going to happen? Are they trying to kill the voice of sanity?
Yeah, they probably are. And on that, I want to bring something up. By the way, folks, forgive me for not reminding you that Mark Collett is live on the programme. It's good to have Mark back. His you can find Mark at thefallofwesternman.com, and I have read the book. Read it before we first spoke, and I really liked it. It's very interesting, very challenging. Check it out if you haven't checked it out before. I have a bone to pick with you. You see, I find you a bit of an enigma. And in fact, there's a friend of mine whom I meet up with almost every day. He's a socialist, trade unionist, called Michael. And he likes listening to you from time to time, but he can't get his head around you either. I can't get my head around you. So I'm going to put this to you. Brilliant point you made there about the potential for a false flag in Syria, blamed on Assad for a pretext then to say, oh, we've got to go in and protect these people. Virginia State Senator Richard Black, who's been on this show several times, said as much in Idlib the other day. Very good stuff. So I have a bone to pick with you, my friend. And I say friend in the most sincere way. You tweeted a link today you tweeted a picture, and I don't understand this. And it was a link to a headline in the Daily Mail, and the headline is more than 70 school children outside Clark's shoe shop with victims stamped on the head and police forced to set up a dispersal zone. So I think this is in Uxbridge, a rather shocking scene, I would imagine, for anybody involved in it. There was a bit of a riot outside a shoe shop, and some people got hurt, I believe, and the police came in. And you tweeted, just another day in Sadiq Khan's multicultural London. Why did you do that?
Because Sadiq Khan's London is now essentially a war zone. And it's a war zone for several reasons. One, because he and his kind, the establishment essentially, have imported people from all over the world with different value systems to us. And London has broken down. But equally, these same people have gone out of their way to ensure that the police do not stop and search people. The police do not profile people. The police cannot get involved in stopping and taking weapons off people. So we now have a knife culture, a gang culture, a violent culture that has been growing and growing and growing. And we have removed all controls that the police may have had over this. And essentially...
So why don't you talk about that? Hang on. Why don't you talk about that? Why don't you talk about on a day when Cressida Dick, the head of the Metropolitan Police, has said, we're being underfunded, and you and I agree on this, they are being underfunded, they're being driven to the brink of collapse to usher in privatisation. Why do you talk about it? Why do you bring in multiculturalism when there's no indication that immigrants, recent immigrants, or ethnic minorities were to blame for it? I don't understand that, because I'm not patronising you when I say I think you're very smart, I think you know what's going on, but you play this immigrant card or multicultural card a lot when it doesn't necessarily apply to, you know, that particular story. And I think, why does he do that? Why not talk about the police being decimated then? What difference does it make if there was a couple of, you know, people involved in that who might be from, you know, who might have originated in Afghanistan? Or what difference does it make? Go ahead.
Well, I think when we bring people in from different cultures, we create a clash of cultures here. There are too many different types of people. They all form their own micro communities. Then you see these clashes. And I have repeatedly mentioned the causes behind this. I've done several videos, in fact, on what's going on in London, on Sadiq Khan, on Sadiq Khan's links to groups that aren't particularly savoury, on Theresa May's role in all of this, on her failure as a Home Secretary, her subsequent failure as Prime Minister, and on the deep-rooted causes behind this knife crime. And these are all on my YouTube channel. Some of these are sort of 15, 20-minute videos. Now, condensing that into a sort of soundbite or a tweet is very difficult. Now, my tweet does gloss over the issue, but I've only got a few hundred characters. And the aim of a snappy tweet is to get people's attention so they go over to my YouTube and they watch these videos. Because when they watch these videos, everything is explained in depth, and my message is always the same. The politicians, the establishment, the fake news media, the lying press, they are the enemy of the people. And by the people, I'm talking about those of European descent. That's my interest. And I want the media, the politicians and the establishment to be swept away, because they will be not only the death of the European people, but the destruction of the whole planet. Because by extension, when Europe sinks, when Western civilization goes down, everything will go down with it.
Let me ask you a final question. Well, let me ask you a final question on that. And thanks for coming back. It's always good to have you on. Mark Collett is our guest. You say that you don't have so many characters in Twitter to express it, and that's absolutely true. And the last thing I would ever say to anybody is to self-censor. And I'm not going to do it now and say to you, self-censor. But you've got 40,000 Twitter followers. That's very, very good. It's very healthy. And if you go on your Twitter account, I mean, you talk about the YouTube videos, and folks, you can find Mark on YouTube as well. He presents a couple of programs a week. He guests on other programs. and it's open discussion. It's very interesting, whether you agree with it or not. Check it out. And again, when I say whether you agree with it or not, I'm not patronising it, and I'm not saying that I necessarily disagree or agree. I'm saying it's good stuff. I recommend it. But you look at that Twitter account and you quite often see a link to a news story that shows that some alleged immigrant somewhere has been arrested for something or has done something. And when you take it in the cold light of day, it could look like it's a case of, oh, look, the bloody immigrants again. And that does piss me off. Not you, Mark, but because I have heard you talk about, you know, immigrants as human beings with the same rights on planet Earth as we have, the right to live, the right to prosper, the right not to be blown to pieces by Western imperialists. And I think if I didn't know you and I never came across you and I went on that Twitter feed, I would look and go, oh Christ, just another guy on the right who just blames Muslims for everything. Well, I don't think that's, well, in fact, I think I can say with certainty that's not your mantra. That's the point I was making. I'm going to give you the final word, and I enjoyed having you back. I enjoyed listening to you, Mark. So final word to you, mate.
Well, it's great being back, and it's also great to hear you in such good health, and I'm really happy that the show's going well and you being able to stream again on YouTube, because I think you said you're able to be on YouTube again now, so that's good. But my final word is, I've never said immigrants are the problem. I've always said immigrants are the symptom of a problem, and I'll just repeat what I said earlier. The problem is the politicians, the media, the press, the entire anti-white establishment. These people are chipping away at Western civilization, and they use immigration as a tool to do that. There is enough room in this world for everyone, but we don't all have to live as neighbours in the same country in overcrowded, unhappy Western nations, which are a product of the globalists.
Right. Just before you go, I said that was the final word. You are going to have the final word, but I'm going to put a tiny counter to that. You see, I believe these poor families who've been destroyed by Western intervention in their countries, and I don't have to talk about the Libya report, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, we don't have to talk about Chilcot, our imperialist activities in those countries, for a variety of reasons, backed by Israel and France, of course, have destroyed these countries and have seen many of these people have absolutely no choice but to leave and come into Southern Europe. Do you know my biggest regret when we talk, not when you and I talk, but when we all talk about this? These people, Mark, and you and I, we have the same enemy. Do you know that? Wouldn't it be remarkable if rather than say, well, look, let's all stick to our own kind, we realised that we have the same enemy, and we looked across the aisle, put left, right, identity politics to one side, and said, let's go after the people who are making the world like this. Absolute final word to you, and I won't interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, I believe that we should stick to our own kind, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be friendly and cordial and trade with people of other kinds. I believe that true global diversity comes from staying together, but that doesn't mean we have to be enemies with others. And of course, when you say our attacks on the Middle East, they're not ours, they're the establishments, the internationalists. And yes, people all over the world, people of different colours, different cultures, they don't have to come together and live in the same space, but it would be nice to see them all turn on these internationalists, remove them from power, because the world surely would be a better place then.
Great stuff, Mark. Thanks for coming back. Go to Mark's website, follow him on Twitter if you haven't. It's at Mark Collett on Twitter. Good to hear from you, mate. I look forward to next time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much. Mark
Collett live on the line to us there from his home. Check him out on YouTube as well. If Mark puts links out to his YouTube show, I will retweet them. And the book that he wrote a couple of years ago is available. You can buy it, but if you don't have the money to buy it, you can download it for free, which I think is a great thing, even though everybody has to eat. And I would recommend, if you can afford it, that you do pay for it. Nice to get a different perspective on the programme today. It's 6:01 as I speak with you live. Special mention for my friend, my great friend, Jean-Anne Crowley, who's listening to the programme. I think she might be in the West in Cleggan. She's got a big gig coming up in a few days' time. She's rehearsing her lines, but she's dealing with an old lurgy. She's dealing with the old chest infection and the cough and all of that. So get well, Jean-Anne, and of course break a leg next week. Of course, 2 minutes past the hour. Well, that was good stuff, that. Coming up on the programme real soon, Martin Paul. Now, Martin is an academic he's a PhD based at Washington State University, and in recent years he's been kind of a lone voice. Now, there have been many people talk about radiation, EMF, microwave radiation, non-ionizing radiation. Of course there have. Great learned men and women. We only recently had Alana Freeland on the programme. But to get somebody kind of enshrined in the establishment to be talking about this subject and doing so in alarming ways, saying to people, you've got to realise that this technology is very dangerous, has an immediate effect and a very serious effect on the cellular makeup of our bodies, our biology, our biological makeup. What's happening with that? What's coming down the line with 5G technology? I'm looking forward to speaking with Martin Pall, and he joins me in a few minutes' time. Loads of tweets came in. I will get to some of them in a minute. Before we do that, though, I've got to take a very quick break. You're listening to The Richie Allen Show live on Fab Radio 2, triggerwarning.tv. Download Cogent Radio app, and you can find the programme on TuneIn Radio. Hundreds of millions of people have the TuneIn Radio app. But a good app to have is the Truth Seeker app, which you can get from the App Store. And the Truth Seeker app is a great app. I recommend it highly. Lots of podcasts on there. Lots of stuff from different content creators. On the right, on the left. Check it out. Truth Seeker app. We're on there. The programme uploads there every day as well. Back in 90 seconds then.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Introducing the H2O app, a powerful water structure and application that programs vibrational energies into water through the use of different sound frequencies. Once programmed, the use of water for drinking, cooking, bathing. Give it to your friends and colleagues or spread it around the garden. The list goes on. It's not just water that the app can be used for either. It's great for programming crystals too. The H2O app is free to download and is available on both Android and Apple platforms. For further information, go to h2oapp.online.
There's a place high in the mountains of Spain, a sanctuary where souls gather from all around the globe to learn about themselves and experience powerful changes in the way we see our world. They become awakened to their gifts and their power to heal others. Become part of this ever-growing worldwide family of unique, pure energy healing practitioners. Discover how amazing you truly are. Go to www.markbayerski.com. It could just change your life forever. Forever.
The Richie Allen Show relies on your support. Go to richieallen.co.uk and set up a monthly donation today.
Welcome back to the programme. Turn the microphone on there, Richie. Put your fader up there, Richie. Tweet at Richie Allen Show. Aiken Drum tweets, my British children are mixed race, European and Asian. What about their rights, tweets Aiken. Yes, absolutely. What about everybody's rights? Ricky, well, that could be a conversation that is not meant for me. Faisal tweets, they're trying to turn London into a war zone by holding back the police in every way. You're right, Richie. It isn't about multiculturalism. I don't blame people for getting caught out by this, though the immigration flood is a problem. Otherwise, says Faisal. Well, of course, they're desecrating the police force, the national police. The Commissioner was on television today talking about funding. We've heard from former detectives on this programme talking about what it means for policing. I have never, ever seen, and I've been in Manchester twice. We arrived here in 2003. We were here till 2005 or thereabouts. We went to Spain for years, came back to the UK. I was in London. I've been back in this city 4 years again. We live in Fallowfield. It is a major urban area. A lot of houses, a lot of people. And It's only a couple of miles away from the city centre. It's very central to Manchester. And it's a big student area, big student-y, if I can say student-y area as well. Go out of an evening, you never see police officers on the beat, ever, because they don't exist. And that is why you have problems in London with knife crime and with gangs, because you used to have in areas, in pretty much every area, whether it be an area with working class people like me, or whether it be more affluent people, you always had bobbies. You always had them. We had them when I was a boy growing up in Ballybeg in Waterford City. You had them. You had the Garda Síochána. You had them out walking. You knew where they were. They knew who people were. They knew the neighbours. They knew the good kids, the bad kids, the tough kids. They knew who they were. We don't have it anymore, and it's by design. That incident today in London has got nothing to do with multiculturalism. Nothing. It's to do with the fact that we don't have any police. You know? So there you go. On what Mark said about sticking to your own kind, of course I don't agree with that. Obviously. And it doesn't mean I'm contradicting things that I've said in the past either. Of course I don't believe we should stick to our own kind. There's great things to be gleaned and learned from people who've come from different cultures and backgrounds. You know, people who've lived in different parts of the world, who grew up there. There's things you can learn from them. I learn all the time about food, you know, and about lifestyle, about ways of living, ways that you can improve yourself. I don't want to be just stuck with people like me, ignorant baldy bollockses like me, white guys, white Christians. I'm not a Christian. No, I like meeting people from other parts of the world. I don't mind the fact that there's, on my street, there's a Sikh gentleman, there's an Indian woman, there's a Pakistan. It doesn't bother me. But that doesn't mean that I don't ignore why that came about and why it was brought to bear on communities like this. I know why. But the ethnic minorities, not to blame for it. They're not the source of your downfall. They're not the reason for the problems that you have. And I'm not going down that road again. I've spoken about it too many times, and I want to get my next guest on the show. So while we do that, let's have some music from The Clash. Yes, it is Tuesday, September the 11th, 2018. This is the Richie Allen Show, going to be live to Washington State University. Dr. Martin Paul joins me. Think it's going to be unmissable. Back in a couple of minutes with him. Welcome back to the programme. It's 11 minutes past 6 as we talk live, you and I, this Tuesday, September the 11th, 2018. Welcome back to the programme. Lots of tweets on the first hour. To follow what people are tweeting to me, simply go to twitter.com, where it says, search Twitter, put Richie Allen Show, all one word, and you will see the dozens and dozens of tweets that I have received. This is a very serious issue, this. And we've talked about it off and on for the last couple of years. Even today on commercial television and radio, there were stories about cell phone usage, mobile phone usage by children, by students, by young men and women. We are using cell phones and tablets and laptop devices connected to Wi-Fi hours and hours and hours a day. Children are spending upwards of an hour on social media sites like Facebook. Is it harming us though? Is it harmful? Now this is something I've discussed over the years with people like Professor Ola Johansson from Sweden. I've talked to many activists who want to get this subject on the agenda on national and local news, but in vain. They can't get it discussed. A lot of people have expressed real concern about the move from 4th generation to 5th generation technology, 5G. We're seeing, or we will be seeing in the coming weeks and months, the rolling out of that, the paving the way for that, and these antennas going up. Now, my guest this hour is an incredibly interesting man. Got in touch with him last week and asked him to come on the programme to talk about this. He is a verifiable expert in this subject. He is a professor of biology at Washington State University. Molecular biology, I should say. And I came across him because he's appeared in several documentaries and he gave several talks in Europe, all of which are available on YouTube, and they are profoundly interesting and disturbing at the same time. Let's welcome to the programme from Washington State, Dr. Martin Pall. Martin, welcome to the programme. How are you?
I'm just fine, thanks. Glad to be with you.
Well, thanks for coming on. I imagine it's a busy time for you with the new year, the new university year, of course. You've been studying this particular subject. You've been looking at this for more than 2 decades, as far as I can tell. What piqued your interest in it? How did you get interested in this field of research, the effects of electromagnetic fields on human cells? How did you get into it?
Well, I was actually working on chemical effects in medicine. And more recently, so actually my involvement in the electromagnetic fields, EMFs, is more recent than that. I published my first paper on it in 2013, which has generated a huge amount of interest, and that's, I've been running ever since. So, and the more I learn, the more horrified I become. There's been evidence on health impacts going back at least to the 1950s that has been very substantial and was recognized, in fact, in 3 different U.S. government reports back in the old days before the industry propaganda came in and started dominating everything. We recognized all this stuff. And since then, fortunately, other countries have taken up the slack in terms of research, and things are still progressing in terms of our understanding at a rapid rate. But the politicians have been basically dominated by the industry propaganda, and that's where we are.
That answers the next question, because you talked about evidence going back as far as the 50s, and that there was governmental knowledge about it. Why then, at that stage, weren't companies who used the technology, why weren't they compelled, Martin, to make it safe? Why not?
Well, I guess if you've got enough money to dominate everything, you can do almost anything you want, and that's the sad state of our political world. Let's talk about the safety guidelines.
Yes.
Okay, because the U.S. and international safety guidelines, and this is the same thing is true in the U.K. as well as in most of the EU and in the U.S. and many other parts of the world, are based only on heating effects. They're based on the assumption that the only thing these EMFs can do is to heat things. And therefore, if heating is, if you don't have much heating, you don't have to worry about it. That's the argument. And this, again, was known to be false going back all the way to the 1950s. There were extraordinary numbers of studies which clearly showed it was false. What was true was that we didn't understand how these non-thermal effects were produced. There were a number of theories about them, but we really didn't know, what the mechanism was. And this is where I got involved. I stumbled upon some findings in the literature that showed that the EMFs work by, and I apologize for the complexities of this, by activating what are called voltage-gated calcium channels. And these are channels in the membrane that surrounds our cells, what's called the plasma membrane. And when they're activated, they open up, and you get huge amounts of calcium that flow into the cell. And the excess calcium in the cell, so normally calcium levels are maintained very low in the cells, except for very short time periods. But when you open up these channels, you get huge amounts of calcium. It's the excess calcium that produces all the effects, or almost all of it anyway. So so we know how it works, and we know why these channels are so incredibly sensitive to the EMFs, and why they get activated at very, very low intensities. And this then leads to all the different effects, and there are huge numbers of them, and they are very concerning.
Before we talk about the effects, this is fascinating and it's important, and you won't be surprised to learn that in advance of you coming on, Martin, I had a lot of correspondence from people who wanted me to put questions to you, and there are too many to get into today in the conversation we will have today. Definitely, the effects is the most important thing, and that's why you're here, and to talk about 5G. People want to know, is it possible to manufacture these devices in a way that prevents the radiation leaking, coming into contact with us and flooding our cells with the calcium that you described there? Can they be made safely?
Well, they can be made much more safely than we're doing, but that's a different question from can they be made safely?
Yeah.
Can they be made safe? And I think, there are inherent problems with wireless devices, because the wireless devices send out these EMFs all over the place, and so they impact our bodies when we get impacted by it. The one other thing that's very important for people to understand is the following. It's been known for many, many years, and the first review that was written on this was published back in 1965, that pulsed EMFs that pulse up and down a lot, and are in most cases much more biologically active and therefore much more hazardous than non-pulsed EMFs, even when they have the same amount of heating that's produced. And so, and every single wireless communication device communicates via pulsations. And so what that means is they're potentially, and I believe actually, much more dangerous as a consequence. And the other thing which comes into this is the smarter the devices are, the more they pulse. So that tells you something very profound. And we keep going. Things get worse and worse and worse. And the literature on this is very well documented. As I say, the first review on it was published back in 1965, and still the case that the industry denies all this stuff. The regulatory agencies pay no attention to it, and so forth. So we're in deep trouble.
We're in deep trouble. And can I go back to something you said a few minutes ago before we start getting into the human health implications of the technology? You said that since 2013, you said you've been on the run ever since. Now, one of the things I worry about, and I mean, I don't know you, it's the first time we've met, but I have seen over the years, not always in the field of molecular biology, not always in the field of politics, but in many different fields, when academics have broken free and have said, well, look, something needs to be done, we need to talk about this, and the establishment doesn't like it. It has often had consequences for the career of the academic, negative consequences. Now, when you say you've been on the run ever since, is that what you mean? Have you had to fight off, attacks on your character, on your credibility since you started talking about this?
Okay, so first of all, you need to know something. I am, I'm Professor Emeritus. Okay.
Yeah.
So I am not. I'm not employed by the university. I'm quote unquote retired, and so in that sense, there are things that other people have to worry about that I don't have to worry about.
Great.
But having, but you raised the question. I mean, basically every single prominent scientist who's been working on EMF effects has been attacked by this multi-trillion-dollar industry. And so right now I'm in the, I'm in the sights.
You're in the crosshairs.
And I know that. And this is relatively recent. I don't think they knew how to take me on. I still don't think they know how to take me on. But, when you've got these kind of forces arrayed against you, you have to be very concerned about it.
One of the things that was said to me today was that this is a relatively recent phenomenon. Well, of course it isn't. The technology's been around for years. But I suppose, Martin, it's really only in the last 3 decades that we've seen cell phone towers, these, enabling devices.
It's much more recent than that, even.
Go on, because
I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah, most of this stuff, we've had huge increases in exposures, just even within the last 5-10 years. And 15 years ago, exposures were much, much lower than they are now. And the problem we have, and one of the problems is, back in the era around in the 1970s, typically, there were quite a number of very good occupational exposure studies that had been done at that time. And you could do them because there weren't a lot of exposures out in the environment. So if somebody was exposed as a consequence of their occupation, you knew what the exposure was. You knew that if they were in a stable environment in the workplace, that they were going to be exposed to the same thing over long time periods, and you could study what the effects were. And there were quite a number of studies of that sort. It's impossible to do studies like that now because we're exposed to so many different things. And, you just walk around, you move from one place to another, your exposures can be dramatically changed. And so a lot of the studies that were done, that I look at are these really old studies because some of them are very good and some of them cannot be replicated now. It's impossible.
We hear all the time. I'm living in a big city. It's a big metropolitan city, Manchester. And we often hear about increases in sleeping difficulties. We get studies all the time in the press about how insomnia is on the rise, about how various debilitating illnesses are on the rise. And when those come up, and this is an independent radio show with a big audience, but it is independent, I will get listeners saying, well, there's no doubt in my mind that it is connected in some way to the prevalence of cell phone towers and EMF. Is there evidence? I know you said it's difficult now to do studies because of everything else, but can we point to, is there an obvious, elephant in the room that certain types of conditions are on the increase in the young, particularly in the young, that we can say coincided with the very recent, appearance of the cell phone towers? Can we say that? Because we're getting in now to the area of what type of effects does this technology have on people. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So there really there are at least two major types of effects that of the general sort that you raise, and they're each of them I think are very serious. There are very large numbers of neurological and neuropsychiatric effects which are clearly caused by the EMFs. And we're not just talking about cell phone towers, we're not talking just about cell phones, we're not just talking about Wi-Fi, we're talking about all kinds of different things, producing similar effects on the nervous system. And these have been studied both in humans and in animals. In animals, you see that there are effects on the structure of the brain that become more and more severe with time of exposures to a particular type of radiation. And to the point where things get absolutely extraordinarily damaged over time. So they start out slowly, but they develop and they become more and more severe. And the occupational exposure studies that were done in humans showed the same pattern. And as they become, and initially, if you just, if you have a modest effect and you stop exposing, which of course is very difficult to do now, things went back to normal over time. This was shown in animals and it was shown in humans. When they become more and more severe, they become irreversible. So that if you just stop exposing, there's still severe damage that's done. So all of this is known, and let me just say, with regard to the what I call the neurological and neuropsychiatric effects, and I published one paper on this. There are quite a number of other papers that have been published on it. What you see are the same things that people complain about all the time here. You see, I can't sleep, I'm tired all the time, I can't concentrate, I'm depressed, my memory doesn't work, I'm anxious, et cetera, et cetera. All these things that people complain about all the time, we know are caused by the EMFs. and we actually know why they're caused by the EMF. So most of it is because the nervous system is extraordinarily sensitive to the effect of the EMFs. It's from the animal studies, it was shown that the nervous system is the most sensitive organ in the entire body, followed by the heart and the testis, interestingly. And you have effects that relate to all three of those organs, but you also get many effects from other things as well. So so we know all this, and of course, and let me just say, everything I say, the industry will claim is not true. So I guarantee that they will say that. So,
but they won't talk to anybody, Martin. It's interesting you say that. Any half-baked journalist will seek out the other side, and I've been talking about this for years, and I've contacted the producers of phones. I know it's not exclusively a phone issue, and it's very good that you bring that up, but I've contacted the mobile phone, cell phone manufacturers countless times and asked them to provide somebody to answer the claims made by learned academics like yourself, and you are very lucky if you get an answer. Ordinarily you're ignored. Every now and then you get an answer where they might send you some press release from years ago saying that everything is hunky-dory, don't worry about it. So you can't get the other side of it because they don't want to talk.
That's right. Well, they will only talk in a controlled environment where they can control, the situation. And they do that, of course, because they know they'll lose in a real debate. They don't have any science, so that's what they do. And the sad fact is that the media have been almost completely defunct in this area, and there have been a few exceptions, but they are very, very few. And yet, there have been, and I have a list of 33 different scientific documents that have been written up by scientists and physicians about this from 2002 to the present, and there are another 2 right now that are being circulated on specifically on 5G. So we'll be up to 35. And so these things have been running, roughly 2 a year during that whole time period, and they're still going. And people don't pay attention to this. So the scientists, say one thing, and then it just gets ignored. And this has happened over and over and over again during that entire time period.
As a man of science and a man of experiments and a man of integrity, you do an experiment and you report the results of that, even if the results were undesired. You might have wanted a different result, but you're a man of science and you report what you find. How life-changing has it been for you, noticing how the media works hard to suppress this, how political parties and leaders, collude to suppress this? I mean, that must be life-changing for somebody like you. The realization of
so let me just say, all of the experiments and studies that I look at are not my own. Okay, what I've been doing is pulling things out of the literature and trying to make sense out of them and trying to understand how they fit with other things that are done by other scientists. And what you find is you find patterns of effects, and that's what really tells you what is very well documented and what's not. And I think that so it's not my data that's involved. I was when I was when I had a laboratory and I had research going on. Obviously, I know how to do experiments. I know how to interpret them. I know what kind of things can go wrong when you do them, and so I have the kind of expertise that you need to analyze other people's data as well as my own, and so that's been very important. Another thing that's been very important. I got my bachelor's degree in physics. I got my PhD in biochemistry and genetics, both from world-class institutions. And so I have the kind of scientific background that you need to deal with something, because this involves the physics as well as the biology and the chemistry.
want to just mention.
I'm not sure I'm not sure I answered your question.
No, you did. No, you answered the question. I'm happy with that. And you did mention 5G, which is a massive concern to listeners to this program who believe that when this has arrived, when it's landed in our cities and towns, that the consequences are going to be catastrophic. And sometimes you worry about hyperbole and you worry about exaggerating. But it's not an exaggeration to say that 5G technology is basically going to change us. Humanity is going to change physically. Is it fair to say that?
I think it's much worse than that.
How?
Well, okay. You have to understand how what 5G is. And why one? So let me just say first of all that the plan is to put out tens of millions of these 5G antennae, all such that they will be very close to almost every place you can go. So it'll be almost virtually impossible to avoid these exposures because they're going to be all over the place, and they will have, I believe, very powerful impacts. What is true is that there has been not one single biological safety test on genuine 5G. And so they're planning to put out tens of millions of these without even doing one biological safety test.
Not one.
And that in and of itself, says, hey, this is totally insane. But I think there are very powerful reasons to think that 5G will be extraordinarily dangerous. And so in order to look at that, you have to compare 5G with the conventional exposures that we are already exposed to, and how they differ, and why I think that they're going to be very, very dangerous. The first thing is that 5G is going to be what they call millimeter wave, so it's much higher frequency than the microwaves that most of the things we're being exposed to. Okay, that turns out to be very important for several reasons. But let me go into a second thing, and that is 5G is supposed to be something that will communicate huge amounts of information in every second, which and the way it will do that is by being very, very highly pulsed. And I said before, the pulsations make these much more dangerous. We don't know how dangerous 5G is going to be because nobody's looked at it. What they have done a little bit is there has been some study done on these millimeter wave frequencies, but as far as I can tell, they're only completely unpulsed. So they're very, very different from what genuine 5G is going to be. And even those studies are chilling. That is, they suggest that the millimeter waves are in fact quite dangerous. So I think it's going. I mean, my prediction, and so let me just say one other thing about this, and I apologize for the complexity.
Not at all. It's very good. You're doing a great job, Martin. Go ahead of explaining it.
Yeah. The way in which, so I talked about the activation of these voltage-gated calcium channels. I abbreviate them VGCCs. They have a structure in them which is called the voltage sensor, which has a whole bunch of charges on it, and it's the forces on those charges which produce the opening of the channel. Okay, so it's an electrical effect, and those charges, as it turns out from their structure and their location, are extraordinarily sensitive to these to the forces. And I estimate that the forces on this voltage sensor are something like 7.2 million times stronger than on singly charged groups that are in the watery parts of our bodies, which is where most of them are. So you're talking about huge, powerful forces. And it turns out that the wavelength of these millimeter wave things get absorbed very rapidly by materials, both materials in our bodies and materials in buildings and things, which is why they need to put them all over the place and use very high power on there so that it'll penetrate. So we can do 5G in all kinds of buildings, and we can access it. And so the way in which the EMFs interact with things is through the charged groups that they're interacting with. So my prediction is the forces on the voltage sensor are going to be extraordinarily strong from the 5G wavelength. And then when you put in all these pulsations, which make them vastly stronger, we're going to be in horrible, horrible shape. That's my prediction. Now, one can say, well, it's a prediction. Maybe it's wrong. Well, I don't think so, but maybe it is. And the only way to look at that is to do real biological testing. And that's, of course, what the industry and the regulatory authorities are specifically avoiding doing. So that's the world we live in. And my prediction is that we will have absolutely powerful effects on us from 5G, that they will be extraordinarily rapid, and that they will have powerful impacts not only on our nervous system, on our reproductive systems, on our hormones, on the DNA of our cells. All of these we know are impacted by the EMFs. They may well have large effects on our hearts as well, and on many other parts of the body. I think it's going to be an absolutely world-class disaster, not only for humans, but an ecological disaster all over the place.
So we're looking at, sorry Martin to interrupt, we're looking at a spike in cancers, we're looking at a rise in all sorts of debilitating diseases. As far as the nervous system goes, let me just remind our listeners, by the way, Dr. Martin Pall, Professor Emeritus, Washington State University, retired, a man who spent many years studying the effects of chemicals on the body, on our cellular structure. Martin talked about that. In recent years, he's begun to look into the effects of non-ionizing radiation, EMFs, on our bodies. He's discovered some startling things. His integrity is unquestionable. Remarkable to have him on the programme speaking about this. We're now talking about 5G, and Martin believes that we will see profound effects on human life, on animal life, maybe plant life on this planet. How will we see, as far as the nervous system goes, how will it manifest? What types of illnesses should we expect to see become more common, Martin?
Well, we talked about the neuropsychiatric effects before. There's also reason to think that the EMFs have strong roles in the causation of both ADHD and autism. And there we're talking mainly about the EMFs that are involved in where either the fetus is involved or the young baby shortly after birth. So we're talking about what's called the perinatal period, the period before and after birth, that there are impacts on the formation of the synapses in the brain. And so that's a period when there's a huge amount of structuring of the brain where the synapses are formed, in which one neuron sort of connects with another. So a typical neuron in the brain has about 1,000 synapses. So there are all kinds of different processes, events that are occurring. They have to occur more or less in the proper way, or the brain function is severely impacted. And I believe that that's exactly what's being disrupted in autism, and that the EMFs are causing it, basically because we talked about calcium before. There are 4 mechanisms that are known to be involved in the formation of these synapses. Each of them are regulated by the calcium levels in the cell. So you got too much calcium in the cell, you're going to mess them up. And I think that's the primary mechanism. There are also chemical effects, by the way, that can also work through calcium, but I think the EMFs are probably the more important of the two. So we may well have a gigantic. We already have a gigantic epidemic of autism, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
It has huge impacts. And it could well be that, instead of having 1 in 38 births being autism child, it could go up to, something approaching 100% from this huge increase in radiation, unless pregnant women are protected from it and the babies after birth are protected from it. So there are huge problems.
Let me ask you a quick question, Martin. My apologies for interrupting, because we've got about 5 minutes left, and thanks for your time today. I say that sincerely, by the way. I'm glad that I found you, and our audience is genuinely thrilled, even though this is very strong stuff and it's scary stuff. It's, they're happy that somebody is talking about it, because people are asking questions. I believe a lot more people are talking about this and asking questions than maybe people realise. Some of our listeners are asking me to put to you, you might want to answer this, you might not. They're saying that there was a time when, and I'm 43 years old now, but when I was a baby, I was vaccinated against polio and I was vaccinated against TB. There are listeners who are saying that these days, particularly in the UK, I can't speak for the United States, by the time a baby is 3 or 4, he or she might have had 14 or 15 different vaccinations. Now, I'm not going all conspiracy theory, but could that have some effect? Could that, mixed in with our exposure to EMFs, could that be, some sort of cause or some sort of reason as well where we are more unhealthy, why we are seeing more autism? What do you think?
Well, I think, so I said before, I think there are chemical effects that come into it, and some of those chemicals are in the vaccines. So I think it's quite possible that that's true. I don't think that the vaccines are the predominant cause of autism, but that doesn't mean that, and people have said, that this has been a very controversial area, as I'm sure you know. But I don't. That doesn't mean that there's no role, and it's very difficult to prove safety. It's almost impossible to prove safety. In fact, in a broader environment. So this could well be something that has a significant role, but not the predominant role. Let me just say one other thing, since we don't have much time. One of my biggest concerns, has to do with reproduction. I think that we will see a crash in reproduction pretty much to zero.
To zero?
And to zero, yeah. And this has been shown in an animal study that was done over 20 years ago, that exposures well within our safety guidelines can do that in mice. I think we may be seeing this in 3 countries in East Asia, as that it's starting already. These are the 3 countries I'm talking about are Singapore, Macau, which really isn't a country, and South Korea. Those 3 countries have 3 of the lowest birth rates already in the world, down well below 60% of replacement levels.
Wow. And
each of them had a major drop in reproduction between 2016 and 2017. And the drop in reproduction in South Korea has been extended into the first half of 2018. So we're seeing big effects there. Now, we don't know for certain that those are caused by the EMFs, but we do know the EMFs can cause these kinds of problems in animals, and they do affect human reproduction as well. And so, so we have all this stuff sort of pointing in this direction, and what we're doing is just totally insane.
Martin, it's not unreasonable to ask this question. Again, it might sound like a tinfoil hat question, no pun intended. But if the people or the institutions responsible for the technology, if they know, and I believe they do know, they know what you know, they know that it has an impact on fertility, it's not unreasonable to ask, even though it sounds crazy, it's not unreasonable to ask, could that be a desired outcome or a desired impact from this technology? I mean, we're talking James Bond supervillains here. It might sound crazy, but if they know about it, what do you think?
I've been asked that several times.
Yeah.
Quite a number of times, actually. I don't know. What I would say is that I think what we're looking at, I mean, when you look at the sum total of the things that we're looking at, the three things that worry me the most are the neurological and neuropsychiatric effects we talked about, the reproductive effects, which I think we may well see a crash essentially to zero. And if it behaves the way it did in the mice, this will be an irreversible crash. Now, so what that tells you, and the third thing that I'm most concerned about is the mutational effects in the germline. We may have gigantic numbers of mutant babies being born, to the extent that any babies are being born. Those are all things that are highly plausible. The first two, I think we have good reason to think are pretty far along. The third, I don't have any good data on. I don't know how far along we are. But I can see a situation where when 5G comes in, we'll have a crash in our collective brain function, which will lead essentially to complete and utter chaos. Because our societies are functioning in terms of our brain functions. We start having massive crashes in our brain function. We are this be extraordinarily destructive. I can see the reproduction going to zero, in which case what happens when a society has no future.
Question for you, last one, and I'd like you to keep the program in mind in the near future when you've got more to say and when there's information that needs to be widely disseminated. I'd appreciate you coming back on because it's important, and I'm glad that you came on, Martin. I don't want to patronise you. I wouldn't dream of it. Question that's come in, and it's about military application. People wonder, can this technology be weaponised? Do you think, has it been weaponised? Could it be used against populations, Martin? Final question for today.
Oh, I think my understanding, and this is all stuff that's more by way of rumor than data, because of course everything is classified, is that the U.S., Canada, the UK, and Russia have all had programs for weaponizing microwave weapons. Now, how far they've gone, I don't know. But I don't have any doubt that, and as you may know, the recent New York Times article has argued, and I think they're absolutely right about that the attacks on U.S. Diplomatic personnel in Cuba and in China were caused by microwave weapons, and I think that's right. I think we know that the microwaves produce those kinds of effects that we're seeing in those people. So that's so I think it's very plausible, and that's, I guess that's all I can say.
It takes a lot of courage, I think, even though you might say, I'm a Professor Emeritus and I am retired, Richie. It still takes enormous courage to speak out about this stuff and subject yourself to criticism and ridicule. I think you're terrific, really. I'm glad that I came across you. I did a show last week on a documentary about the effects of this, and you came up, and I was glad to get in touch with you because people need to hear this and they then need to make a decision on what they're going to do with that information. Please do keep us in mind when you've got more to say, and come back, Martin. I'd be glad to have you back, and I really appreciate your time today. I mean that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for that. That was Dr. Martin Pall, PhD, Professor Emeritus at Washington State University, and he was live from Washington State today talking about why, after spending years investigating the effects of chemicals on our cellular structure, why in 2013 then he began to learn and understand that the effects of microwave radiation, EMF, non-ionizing radiation on our body had been widely known since the 50s, what it was doing to our bodies and what it would continue to do if unchecked. And he's been speaking and writing about that for a few years. And it's profound stuff there. You heard Martin say clearly that reproduction will be reduced to zero, in his opinion, after the tens of millions of 5G antennae, because globally it will be tens of millions, not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. And he reckons that it's going to have catastrophic consequences for human reproduction, but also it's going to have catastrophic consequences for our brains and how our brains work and operate. And that's not fear-mongering. This is the reason I brought him on, even though we discussed this last week, is because this is a man whose work has been peer-reviewed for years. His work on chemical effects on the body, peer-reviewed and lauded. Won various medals, won award after award after award for his work on microbiology, on cellular biology, and the harmful effects of chemicals on it. This man is coming out saying now that what's coming down the line, and there isn't anything we can do about that. You're a defeatist, Richie. You're a whinger and you're a defeatist. No, I'm not. Nothing is going to stop this. It's coming. It'll be here next year in this country. And this is what he's telling us. And that's about all we have time for today. Big shout out to Mark Collett for coming on the programme in the first hour. Enjoyed listening to Mark again. And Dr. Martin Pall, that's Pall PHD. You heard him there discussing why he believes that the technology is going to be a game changer for humankind, for animal kind on this planet in the very, very, very near future. There you go. Right, that's it. Thanks for listening to it. Thanks for listening to him. Do share that widely when it appears on podcast real soon. It'll be on YouTube as well in around about 3 hours' time. It will appear, the entire programme, minus the music, which I think I played one song tonight, on YouTube as well. Thanks for listening to the show. We'll do it all again tomorrow at 5 p.m. UK time. The new starting time for the programme, by the way, 5 p.m. UK time on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv, the Cogent Radio app, the TuneIn app, and of course richieallen.co.uk. Let me give a plug. Coming up at 10:30 tonight on the Cogent Radio app, on triggerwarning.tv, Hayden Hewitt and Graham will present the Trigger Warning show, where they'll be talking about geopolitical events, some of the big news stories of the day, and they will be giving you a different perspective to that which you would get on commercial radio. That's Hayden Hewitt and Graham tonight at 10:30. That's UK time on triggerwarning.tv and the Cogent Radio app. That programme has flown by. Thanks for listening to it. Look after yourselves and one another. Leaving you with an oldie from Midnight Oil. See you tomorrow then. Bye for now. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thanks for listening. Bye now.